Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I am going to read a comedy short story today that I wrote. It's called Attack of the 4'2" Pig Boy. So here we go. Pig Boy is what they called me. It took those vicious teenagers forever to stop. There's nothing worse than waking up at 5 in the morning during the summer when you're a kid. At 14, I had to get up that early 5 days a week to go to work all summer long. Several events led to my finding a job that year, not the least of which was the fact that my father's work had fallen through. He'd moved us all to Incline Village, a small, affluent community in Lake Tahoe, after he had been rewarded with a promising new project in Reno, Nevada. Unfortunately, my father's wealthy benefactor had passed away, and things began to quickly spiral downward. Within a matter of months, my family was broke. One day it became clear that I would have to find a job. It was a modest little scene. I arrived at home after school and in my usual fashion, began guzzling milk right from the container. My mother interrupted me to say, A, please don't drink from the container again, and B, it really doesn't matter because we won't have milk for guzzling anymore anyway. It was clear from that moment on that I would have to fund my own activities. Excuse me. I needed to find a job. My neighbor Monique suggested I work with her. I had very grudgingly agreed, knowing exactly what that meant. Monique worked at the Ponderosa Ranch, which had been built in order to film Bonanza, the popular Western television show from the 50s and 60s. Previously occupied in the television dimension by the Cartwright family, it was now a sad, discarded, little fake Western town, with the look of a place that had once known the bent thrill of mediocre fame and unsustainable glory, both of which had long ago faded. There were dilapidated, faded signs strewn throughout the ranch, which read things like Haas sat here or Little Joe's favorite fence. It was profoundly depressing. Like a giant rotting facade of a cowboy, the ranch had become an uninspiring diversion for the tourists in Lake Tahoe who could not brave the icy cold of the lake during the summer. The Ponderosa mostly attracted families still lost in the mysticism of 50s television. They would stroll the pretend Main Street, lapping at cherry snow cones with their red dye number 9 stained tongues, calling out to each other whenever a familiar building came into view. It was a haven for people who could not get a life. The Ponderosa was also the place for local teenagers from poor families to earn summer wages, while their wealthy peers enjoyed water skis pulled by the umbilical tow ropes attached to their father's powerboats, along with the other spoils of a happy, well-financed summertime in Lake Tahoe. To work at the Ponderosa Ranch was basically the equivalent of carrying a sign that read, "Beat me up, I'm poor." It was the greatest insult in the minds of Lake Tahoe teenagers, nothing less than a fall from grace. And there was no other place in Incline Village that would hire a 14-year-old. I had no choice but to apply for a job. An act, if successful, would garner me the dubious achievement of being the youngest payroll worker in Incline Village. Much to my chagrin, I was hired. Monique tried her best to appear supportive while suppressing her amusement. Fully comfortable with her advanced 15-year-old wisdom, she informed me that upon employment, a new employee was issued a Western outfit consisting of blue jeans and a red and white checkered cowboy shirt, complete with mother of pearl snaps, which would look totally cute on me. Continuing, Monique said that the new recruit was then assigned to an area of the ranch. Even within the Ponderosa, there was a pecking order among the disgruntled teenage employees. The most sought after positions were as tour guides in the Cartwright's house, a one-room log veneer masterpiece of proto-modern 50s television realism. Dust covered and without plumbing, it felt nothing like a real home, but more of a crash test dummy of a house. Even at 14, I realized that a goal of climbing my way up the ranch's roped ladder of success to only end up giving tours of a one-room old set was as vacant as the shiny-lipped 17-year-old female veterans of the ranch who were the current tour guides. Other positions vied for at the Ponderosa Ranch were in the gift shop, the snack bar, and the carnival game section where Monique worked. At the bottom of the list and the lowest of the low was the petting zoo. At 14, I was rather diminutive, barely clearing 4'2" in height. On my first day, the sage-like 18-year-old manager could not find a Western outfit small enough for me. Due to the fact that I was joining the ranch a bit late in the season, all that was available were a pair of huge blue jeans and an extra large red and white checkered shirt. Once I had changed, the manager realized the jeans were not going to stay up. He solved this problem by tying a rope around my waist. As I stood in the outfit waiting for my assignment, feeling my bony arms floating into the luminous sleeves of the shirt, I also felt the tears welling in my eyes. I kept swallowing the lump that was growing in my throat. I hoped he hadn't noticed. Then he uttered those fateful words. I watched as his pimply lips parted in slow motion, the first whiskers of his developing manhood sprouting from the eruptions around his mouth, giving it the look of a strange, spiny succulent. From this ugly opening crawled the phrase, petting zoo. My heart began pounding, causing the arteries in my head to bang my temples like conga drums. He then fastened a heavy coin changer around my waist, instantly causing the jeans to sag. At this point, I almost stopped breathing completely. In a short time, I would find myself holding my breath on purpose. From then on, at 5 every morning, Monique and I could be found waiting out in the cold summer Lake Tahoe mornings as my father backed our poorly heated 66 Land Rover out of the garage. I was more than angry at him, as I felt that the whole ordeal was directly his fault. I would stand leaning on one hip, as only a teenager is able, arms folded in bitter protest as he motioned me into the Rover each morning. This was the carpool to the Ponderosa, home on the range in my own private Western-styled hell. I dreaded each morning as the Rover would round the bend, and I would see the ranch as it loomed from its position, tucked at the bottom of a hillside on the main highway which encircled the lake. In the parking lot each morning where my father dropped us off, the overpowering smell of the petting zoo at the very end of the ranch filled my nostrils, instantly causing my breakfast to threaten reemergence. As I walked towards the impending torment, I learned to pass time by counting days until the summer was over and I could return to school. Somehow this made my trek to the petting zoo more tolerable. The petting zoo consisted of an open corral inhabited by 5 filthy full-grown hogs. In the corner of the sty were pellet dispensers that, for a dime, spewed a handful of alfalfa pellets so the tourists could feed the pigs. The odd thing about the petting zoo is that no actual petting ever occurred. This was most probably due to the fact that the hogs were usually soaked with feces and mud. The pigs were joined in their pen by enormous swirling clouds of biting black flies. Working in the petting zoo was a true punishment. I often wondered what I had done. Apparently, the alfalfa pellet dispensers were placed inside the pen to deter theft or vandalism. My job was simple: to make change and get a handful of alfalfa pellets from the dispensers for the tourists. The pungent mud and shit mixture that comprised the floor of the pen steamed every morning in that bitterly cold air, composting the hogs and me slowly from the feet up. The pigs were huge, their backs much higher than the top of my head, accentuated by the fact that my feet and ankles often disappeared into the 6 inches of fluid, heated fecal magma that masqueraded as the ground. Guests would lean over the railings and yell with excitement into the pen for assistance, and then alternatively gasp in shock, disbelieving their eyes as I materialize as if from thin air. A tiny, androgynous child in dirty, oversized clothing, barely able to walk through the giant beasts. The sight of me must have been astounding. Matching the hogs, I was usually coated by 9 in the morning with dirt and feces. The tourists would watch me struggle through the sludge towards them, sliding along Igor style in their direction, my eyes fixed on the ground, my shoes making a suction cup-like sound as they freed each foot from the dung soup to take the next step. Now and then as I approached, I would have to yank on my legs with both hands to free them from the bog, which often resulted, at times, in my shoes being pulled completely off, followed by a search for the missing shoe deep in the moving mud. The sleeves of my extra large cowboy shirt hung to my knees from the weight of the gross sludge caked upon them. I constantly re-rolled them or shoved them up my arms just so I could find my hands. The tourists would silently lean over the fence and hand me quarters once I stood before them, thoughts of quiet sympathy and mercy killing on their faces. If I were able to locate the coin changer concealed by the filthy folds of my giant shirt, I would make change for the tourists and begin my journey to the alfalfa dispensers. I had learned to store alfalfa pellets in the huge pockets of my pants and shirt so I could throw them to the opposite side of the pen, baiting the swine so they would not notice me as I would plunk ankle deep in the poopy quagmire to the dispensers. Unfortunately, over the years, the beasts had become slaves to the sound of the crank of the pellet dispensers. They had become Pavlov's hogs. Upon hearing the crank, the pigs would rush the machines and me, knocking me over, grunting loudly as they punted me about in the mud like a volleyball in their frenzied search for pellets. Occasionally, I would somehow manage to get a few pellets to the tourists. Strangely, no longer interested in feeding the pigs themselves, the tourists' mouths were more times than not hanging open in shock at this point, and would try to hide the looks of horror on their faces, a reaction to the spectacle of my unintentional circus act. All parents present tended to attempt to draw their children's attention away from me and point with fake smiles to the Cartwright's fake house on the hill. Unfortunately, attention distraction would fail if even one child extended his or her hand over the railing in even a mock offering of a pellet, for this would cause the pigs to panic, smashing and rolling me between them as they scrambled from the dispensers to eat out of the tourists' hands. Sometimes I would get lifted from the ground completely, my muffled screams barely audible, with great rises and fall in volume, as I was held firmly between the belly sides of the monstrous animals. My wailing and squirming would cause the pigs to further panic and run in herd formation, with me suspended by their enormous guts. My muddy blonde bowl cut would flap in the breeze as the pigs gained velocity as they ran swirling in circles around the pen. When this happened, the tourist mothers, unable to utter a word, would often cover their children's eyes, even when the occasional 2 or 3-year-old would clap, mistaking my torment for a performance. This went on every day, several times a day. I was ruining vacations. If this all weren't enough, I had developed an ineffective coping strategy. I simply cried the entire time. I cried while I gathered change. I cried while I dispensed pellets. I cried while I lifted the while lifted by the pigs. During quiet periods, I would lean against the pigs crying, drying my eyes with the giant sleeves of my muddy shirt. By the end of each day, my tears would cut two clear trails through the brown mud mask on my face. Even during lunch, as I sat on the steps of the make-believe church, praying to the facade for help while eating tuna sandwiches prepared by my mother, I cried. Sometimes I think the tourists passing by considered me animatronic, a robotic part of the church set. Church, sobbing child, muddy clothes, tuna fish. Somehow I guess it worked. After 2 weeks of this, I was called to the office. There had been complaints. My wailing was disturbing and upsetting to our visitors. I was told that I was going to be fired for crying if I didn't stop. Of course, upon hearing this, I immediately started crying. My manager took pity on me and transferred me to the carnival games section. Thus, I graduated from the petting zoo, a rite of passage. I spent the rest of that summer swindling tourists who hoped to win big, ugly stuffed animals. That felt good. Eventually, Monique stopped asking about the crying zoo, as she called it, but everyone else called me PigBoy for the rest of the summer. The pigs actually seemed to miss me, as children who had lost a favorite stuffed sock monkey might feel. Still, despite all the taunting, I actually began to enjoy my new Carnival Games assignment. Arriving clean and leaving work clean in of itself felt like a promotion. By the way, the milk cans are rigged. They're especially made with a smaller opening at the top so a softball can barely fit through. So are the apple baskets. They are nailed to the stand, but not before a large piece of rubber is placed underneath them, so each softball will bounce right out. Yep, swindling felt good. However, when I reminisce about the Ponderosa, I often think of the 2 weeks in the petting zoo and not the carnival games. Sometime decades later, as I sat in the large, beautiful conference room of the glorious state-of-the-art high-rise building in downtown San Francisco, where I spent years as a corporate paralegal, I would glance across the exquisite and enormous mahogany table, exchanging looks with the corporate attorneys sitting around me, their handsome faces reflected in the intense shine of the table's surface, dressed in their corporate casual wear for Banana Republic. I would sigh deeply with satisfaction and think, I really miss those pigs. Well, that concludes my reading of PigBoy, Attack of the 4'2" PigBoy. I hope you enjoyed it. I had some interference. My dog was in the room, and so I apologize for any distractions. If you like what you hear, please think about purchasing the book I have out now, Secrets of a 100-Foot Boy. Does not include this story, but has many others. It's about a time that my family and I lived in a hotel in Santa Barbara in 75, where a murder occurred and my brother found the body. Anyway, thanks again. I hope you'll come back. I'll be reading more short stories in the future. Cheers.